She was just an island, small, cold, forgotten by most, but somehow the world couldn't stop falling in love with her, not because she had strength, but because she had strategy, not because she had numbers, but because she knew how to play every heart in the room. What started with trade became obsession. What began with ships became empires. This isn't just history, it's seduction on a global scale, and by the time anyone noticed, she had already touched every shore, stolen every crown, rewritten every rule. This is not the story you read in school. This is the real romance between power and precision, the rise of an island that conquered not with force alone, but with charm, cunning, and unmatched timing. If you're drawn to stories that feel like history and heartbreak all at once, like this video, subscribe and get ready to see the world fall. Again, when we look at a map today, it's easy to overlook the little island sitting just off the northwest coast of mainland Europe. The United Kingdom, small in landmass, modest in natural resources, and often beset by gloomy weather, hardly seems like the kind of place that would once rule over a quarter of the Earth's population. But it did, and not just through conquest. Britain shaped the modern world through trade, industry, science, law, and language. But how? How did a nation the size of Michigan come to dominate oceans, redraw borders, and influence cultures thousands of miles away? The story begins over 1,000 years ago, not with empires, but with survival. In the early medieval period, what we now call Britain was a fragmented land. Angles, Saxons, and Vikings clashed over muddy hills and riverbanks, trying to carve out kingdoms from one another. England, Scotland, and Wales were not yet united. Life was tribal, violent, and deeply local. There were no dreams of global rule, only the fight to keep hold of farmland, fend off raiders, and survive harsh winters. But amid this chaos, seeds were being planted. By the 11th century, after the Norman conquest of 1066, England began to stabilize under centralized rule. The Normans brought feudalism, military innovation, and a new administrative structure. They built stone castles, set up systems for taxation and law, and most importantly, they began to record it all. The Domesday Book of 1086 was one of the first large-scale government surveys in Europe. England, once just a patchwork of warring tribes, was now a functioning state with a bureaucracy, legal system, and king powerful enough to bring feuding lords to heel. But power on the island was not enough. By the 13th and 14th centuries, English kings had their eyes set across the Channel, laying claim to parts of France. This led to the 100 Years' War, a series of brutal conflicts that would drain England's coffers but forge a stronger sense of national identity. It also led to the rise of England's navy. As battles raged on land, control of the seas became crucial. Ships became not just tools of war, but tools of survival and wealth. The English began to understand something that would define their history for centuries. Whoever controls the seas controls the world. The real turning point came in the 16th century. The Reformation shattered the religious monopoly of the Catholic Church across Europe. In England, Henry Roman VIII broke from Rome, creating the Church of England. This wasn't just a spiritual rebellion, it was political. By removing papal influence, the English crown gained more control over its lands, its people, and its destiny. And as Europe descended into religious wars, England began to look outward. The oceans called. Sir Francis Drake circled the globe. John Cabot explored the coast of North America. English ships began to challenge Spanish and Portuguese dominance on the high seas. But colonization was still in its infancy. England had neither the resources nor the unified will to build a true empire. Yet, then came the 17th century. Everything changed. Civil war erupted in England. The monarchy was overthrown, a king was beheaded, and for a few years Britain became a republic under Oliver Cromwell. It was a dark time of internal strife, but something strange happened during this chaos. Britain didn't collapse. In fact, its institutions, like Parliament, common law, and market capitalism, grew stronger, and when the monarchy was restored in 1660, it returned with limits, the glorious revolution of 1688 cemented parliamentary supremacy. While other European powers were ruled by absolute monarchs, Britain had begun to experiment with democracy. This unique political evolution gave Britain something its rivals lacked: relative internal stability. That stability created space for something else: economic innovation. In the 18th century, Britain industrialized faster than any other country in the world. While other nations still relied on manual labor, Britain harnessed coal, iron, and steam. Factories sprang up, textile production exploded, railroads cut across the countryside, canals linked cities. For the first time in human history, ordinary people began to leave farms and work in cities, creating an urban, working-class society. But why Britain? Why not France or Spain? The answer lies in a perfect storm of factors. Britain had a relatively free market system. Its patent laws encouraged invention. Its banking system was sophisticated. And most importantly, its navy ruled the seas. Britain could ship goods anywhere. It could import raw materials from its colonies and export finished products to global markets. Its merchant fleet was massive. Its shipbuilding industry unmatched. Trade was king, and Britain sat on the throne. By the mid-18th century, Britain had already taken key territories in India. The British East India Company, a private corporation with its own army, became the de facto ruler of vast parts of the subcontinent. Meanwhile, in the Americas, 13 British colonies stretched from Maine to Georgia. Sugar plantations in the Caribbean were producing enormous wealth, often on the backs of enslaved Africans, whose brutal exploitation remains one of the darkest stains on Britain's legacy. The 7 Years' War 1756-1763 was a global war before anyone called them that. Britain emerged victorious, gaining Canada from France and dominating the seas, but war was expensive, and in trying to recoup costs by taxing American colonists, Britain sowed the seeds of rebellion. The American Revolution was a humbling loss. Britain's most prosperous colonies broke away. It was a reminder that even empires have limits, but Britain didn't crumble, far from it. Instead, it looked east. While America was lost, India was being absorbed. By the early 19th century, Britain was the undisputed colonial power in South Asia. It controlled ports in China, established colonies in Australia, and expanded into Africa. The 19th century would become the true age of British Empire, and it was powered by industry. No nation could match British manufacturing output. From Sheffield steel to Manchester cotton, British goods flooded the world. British banks financed railroads in Latin America. British engineers built dams in Egypt. British ships carried tea from China, opium to India, and missionaries to Africa. It was an empire built as much on commerce as on conquest. But not all was glorious. Colonialism brought exploitation, cultural erasure, and violence. Famines in India, the suppression of uprisings, and the transatlantic slave trade left scars that endure to this day. Yet the machinery of empire kept running. By Queen Victoria's reign, Britain was not just a nation, it was a global force. The British Empire covered over 13 million square miles. London was the financial capital of the world. English was becoming the global lingua franca. The British Navy patrolled the oceans like a guardian of commerce, law, and sometimes imperial arrogance. This dominance didn't come from size, it came from systems. Britain exported institutions, common law, parliamentary democracy, capitalism, and English language. It also exported literature, science, and ideas, Newton's physics, Darwin's theory of evolution, Adam Smith's capitalism. Shakespeare's plays, these exports shaped the modern world, but empires don't last forever. The 20th century brought 2 world wars. In both, Britain played a central role, but victory came at a cost. After World War I, the empire was weakened. After World War Roman II, it was bankrupt. India gained independence in 1947. Africa followed. The sun began to set on the British Empire, and yet Britain adapted. It transitioned from empire to commonwealth, from colonizer to ally, from industrial giant to global financier. Today, Britain is no longer an empire, but its legacy is everywhere. In legal systems, in railways, in schools, in languages, and in borders. It's a legacy full of contradictions, of brilliance and brutality, of innovation and injustice. So how did Britain, a tiny island off the coast of Europe, rule the world? It ruled through vision, through ships, through trade, through invention, through a willingness to evolve, and yes, through exploitation and force. But most of all, it ruled because it understood one simple truth: ideas are stronger than armies. And institutions, when nurtured, can outlast empires. That's how Britain rose, not just by fighting wars, but by shaping systems. Systems that, good or bad, still shape the world we live in today. And that was how a small island, battered by wind and surrounded by sea, became the center of the world, not by brute strength alone, but by charm, by timing, by knowing how to wait, when to move, and when to stay silent. She wasn't always right, she wasn't always fair, but she was unforgettable. Empires came and went, alliances changed, maps were redrawn, but somehow she remained in the story, in the heart, in the memory. Because some powers don't roar, they whisper and the world listens. If this journey moved you, if you felt the rise, the ache, the love and loss behind it all, then like this video, subscribe to the channel and join me next time for another story where history isn't just told, it's felt. Until then, stay curious, stay bold, and never forget how even the quietest voices can change the world.